Hey fearsome friends, are you ready to sit back, relax, and listen to some truly terrifying tales? I hope so. Enjoy and keep being creepy. This took place when I was around the age of 7, and I remember not thinking it was too much of a big deal. But, in retrospect, it really was. So I used to live in a bad neighborhood, which included a lot of criminals and sex offenders. The aforementioned friend in the title had a sister, that while their mum was getting them ready to go to school, the sister was kidnapped. Luckily they found her, along with a bunch of other little kids in this guy's house, but it happened right in front of her mother in the space of only 40 seconds. So yeah, it was a really bad neighborhood. I had a couple of friends I would spend my days playing with, until our mothers would call us in for dinner. They were Fabian, Valerie, and Jacob. Jacob was about my age and had an older brother, Gabriel, who was 17 and has autism. Sometimes we would all play with Gabriel because his brain would conjure up some very imaginative stories for us 7 to 9-year-olds. But on this day it was just me and Jacob, and we had been hanging out all day, messing around with these new walkie-talkies we had just got. To describe the environment, I lived in a weird upstairs-downstairs apartment, a single one, so it looked like a big house with a staircase up the side. We had a shed and a yard, and on either side was a wall separating us from an apartment complex on the left of where I lived. From the angle of the driveway was the complex where Fabian lived, and about 25 feet of wood chips separated me from Jacob's house. It was a strange layout, but I could just walk up and knock on Jacob's door any time. So we were at the complex on the left playing with our walkie-talkies, seeing how far the range would let us speak from, and we were on the steps of Fabian's house, waiting for him to get back home from the mall. We were there for about 20 minutes when we noticed an old man looking at us through his window. We didn't think much of it, got bored and decided to start using the walkie-talkies again, testing the range and saying things to each other that was comedy gold for a 7-year-old, when a door suddenly opened, and out walked the old man that had been looking at us. He had a strange short top hat, with some 70s-era, round colour-tinted Beatles-style glasses on, along with a white thermal sweater, tan-brown pants and suspenders. He had a beard too. He smiled at us and said hello. We'd seen him before a few times, so we said hello back, and he began talking about various things. He was going on about how he had all these cool collectible antique figures, toys, action figures, and dragon statues. It made my little 7-year-old self go wild. He invited me and Jacob in to see, so we went in. As we entered through the front door, it stank in there. It was damp, musty, and humid, and he smelled like cigarettes, among other things I can't put my finger on. There was a strange hum coming from his house, and he was still talking, just sort of directing us around and telling the stories of the figures. I started feeling a bit odd, and he said he needed help with the dishes. As he walked me into the kitchen, I didn't fully enter, but I got close enough that I could see a filthy kitchen that stank badly. It was visibly infested, and I mean infested with cockroaches. My parents had taught me about stranger danger, and my dad actually taught me self-defense and ran little kidnapping drills on me. He isn't a military man at all, but he'd give me lessons on how to defend myself. Now my alarm bells started ringing. I said no as politely as I could, and he said, "Oh, come on, can't you spare some time to help a poor old man?" I felt him move behind me, and something in me just knew this was wrong. So I turned, and he was shutting the front door that had been open this whole time. I thought quickly and reacted even faster. I jammed my foot between the door and the frame to wedge it open, and I said, "No, thank you." "Oh, no, really, come on, it's okay," he replied. I started thinking about ways to defend myself, and he was old, so I knew I could take him if I had to. My dad had taught me a way to hit someone in the bottom of the nose with your palm to really screw them up. Jacob had been looking around the whole time and had been in the corner for the past 30 seconds. He picked up on the uneasy vibe and started speaking up. The old man was trying to shut the door, when just then Jacob's mum furiously screamed his name. Now Jacob's mother, to put it lightly, was a vile bitch. She'd get angry with all of her kids to an inhumane extent over practically nothing, and she didn't want Jacob over at this complex, and he knew that. He said, oh crap, I gotta go." As he ran past and shoved the door open, causing the old man to stumble, I took the only chance I'd probably get and ran out. I remember not wanting to face the reality of that situation, so I kept downplaying it in my head back then, convincing myself it wasn't that bad, but I still didn't ever want to see him again. Again, in retrospect, it was stupid. I told my parents, but I never told them the full story. Because, well, Fabian lived in that complex and I didn't want them to stop me from going there and seeing him. Stupid, I know. Still, I wonder about that old man. And I wonder what was up with him, and the apartment, and the smell. God, the smell. I honestly don't want to think about what would have happened if I had missed lodging my foot in the door by just a second. When I was 17, I lived with my grandparents in a tucked-away suburban neighborhood in South California. I was very social back then, partied a lot, and was out doing something pretty much every single night, getting home anywhere from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. We had only lived there for maybe 6 months, and only had one key. The neighborhood was all old white people, and some younger families that were all upper middle class, and no one drove into our street unless they lived there or knew someone who did. My family was always home, so I never took the sole house key, and the front door and backyard sliding door were always unlocked, so I could come home at any time of the night and then lock it behind me. Also, my husky slept outside and liked to come in and out as she pleased, which is the main reason the slider door was always open all night. I'll circle back to why mentioning my dog is important in a bit. Fast forward to a random night I was out with a friend of mine. I have no recollection of what we did that night, but we probably went to someone's house and did a bunch of coke till 3 a.m. She drove me home as I don't drive and dropped me off at about 3:45 a.m. I said goodbye, headed inside and locked the door behind me. I went into the kitchen and popped a cup of noodles in the microwave, and about 5 minutes later I went upstairs to my room. My room was on the second floor, directly above the garage and driveway, and looking out you can see, about 50 yards away, the entrance to my street, which was shaped like the letter P, so anyone who drove into my street I could clearly see, and they would have to loop around and pass our house to leave via the same road. This is when I looked out of my window and saw them. My lights were already on, and my curtains already drawn, from when I left in a hurry from earlier. I walked up to the window to shut the curtains, looked down into my driveway, and there, between my grandparents' 4 parked cars, stood a very large man staring up into my window, dead still with a blank stare. He was Hispanic, late 20s to early 30s, about 6'2" and at least 250 pounds. He also wore a red shirt. I immediately dropped to the floor, but there's no way he didn't already see me. And as I dropped, I saw another man walking out from my gate, which is not visible from my window, next to the driveway and coming out from inside towards the other man. I heard some brief speaking from the man who came out of the gate and couldn't understand what language it was, but it was not English. Oddly though, it didn't sound Spanish either. After I dropped to the floor, I crawled into my grandpa's office, which sat directly next to my room and had a window that also faced the driveway. The lights were off in there, so I could look out without being seen. The man who I saw standing between our cars was still standing there, staring and motionless. The other man was looking around and pointing to my house. I nearly vomited. I crawled to my grandparents' room down the hall. And I was crawling because the upper level was a loft style, where you can see the whole lower level, and out of the glass front door and windows. You can also see in. I frantically knocked on their door, trying to stay quiet as to not tip off these men, because I wanted them to be caught and questioned by police. My grandparents finally woke up and could barely understand me because I was shaking so badly. My words were just spilling out. My grandpa, being the fearless, grumpy old man he is, put on his robe and decided to walk outside and investigate himself. I called the cops and watched from the upstairs window to make sure nothing happened to him. By the time he'd gone outside and stood in the driveway, the men were gone from my sight. A few moments later, a car sped out of our street with the lights off, and it had no license plate. He told me once he'd come back inside that when he went out there, they were parked next to my next-door neighbour's car in her driveway, with the car on but lights off, and the seats reclined. He said it looked like they were sleeping, or at least pretending to. When they looked over and saw him, they backed out and sped off. The cops took a whopping 30 minutes to show up. Didn't want my descriptions of the men, or the car. They said lock the doors and if they come back, call the cops. They drove around my street for a bit, then left. Great. Thanks for the help. My grandma thought I was just on drugs and didn't feel the level of urgency or danger that I felt, and my grandpa was also very nonchalant, even though he'd seen them himself, which pissed me off and made me feel even more helpless. I slept on the floor of their room from that night on until about 3 months later. That wasn't the end, though. So, my husky. Her name is Nala, and at the time she was about 2. She's small for a husky at about 50 pounds, but to people who aren't super familiar with dogs, she looks pretty threatening. She chose to always sleep outside, which is why we always left the slider to the backyard open. Literally always. My grandparents would get pissed when I would close and lock it because she'd piss and shit in the house. Anyway, about a month or so before that night, I saw those men, and I was in the backyard and saw Nala chewing on something. She has possession aggression with certain things like bones, small animals, and things she's stolen. So that basically means when you go near her and she's in that state, she growls, flashes her teeth, snarls and lunges, and if you dare to reach your hand out as if to take what she has, you'll lose your hand. When I walked up to her, she lunged at me. She had a steak, a rotten, mouldy, obviously old, T-bone steak, and it looked like she'd been working on it for a while. I asked my grandparents about it, and they hadn't given it to her. I also asked my neighbours if they'd maybe thrown it to her over the fence, but they had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't think any more of it. That is until it happened 4 more times. On 4 separate occasions, I found her with a rotten meat clinging to the bone, T-bone steak. I threw them away each time I found them, so I knew they were new. I asked my neighbours again, thinking maybe they thought I was mad, and they were giving my dog food and lying to me. But nothing. Like I said, this was coincidentally happening in the weeks leading up to the night I saw those men. The event that made me start to connect the dots between the steaks that Nala was finding and these men happened the second time I encountered them. Fast forward about 3 months after that initial event. I hadn't slept in my room since, and I went on a trip to Europe to visit some family for a month. Nothing had happened since that night, but the trauma and fear were very real to me. I lost weight and would stay up all night listening to every noise I heard and analysing it, and I would peek out the windows at every couple of minutes until 6 a.m. I was a wreck, and whilst out of the country, I came to terms with everything in my own mind and decided I had to stop living like that, in constant fear. What were those men going to do to me if I hadn't had seen them? If they wanted to break in and rob us, all of us were pretty much gone during the day, and most days a week for at least a few hours. Why wait for everyone to be home? If they were peeping Toms, they could have parked on my street and watched me all night. I would have never known. I honestly think they were going to try to take me. Trafficking, maybe. I should mention I am a model and have a relatively big social media following. I do a lot of live streams, and I'm very interactive with my followers, and had been in the spotlight online since I was 13. I'd returned home from Europe, and about a week or so later decided I was going to finally go out again. It was the first day where I really felt okay and not so afraid. I'd gotten used to things being normal again, and was excited to move on from the whole ordeal, So that night I went out. I came home earlier than usual, about 1 or 2 a.m., and I had my key this time. We'd started locking the doors after that night. My friend waited for me to go through my gate and get to my door before leaving, and as I pulled out my keys and walked up to the door, I heard a rustling in the bushes. I thought I was just being paranoid and that it was just an animal. Just a quick side note to give you a better picture. Entering my property, you walk through a 3-foot-tall, swing-open gate that is adjacent to the driveway, and about 6 steps down a path to the front door, there's a small 3-foot gate to the backyard, which is adjacent to the front door on the left. When I heard the rustling, I instinctively flashed my unlocked phone screen in that direction for light, so as to look into the pitch-black yard. At the exact moment I did that, someone, about 4 feet in front of me, flashed their phone screen as if they were investigating the same way I was. I didn't see the person, just the phone screen, which had a text conversation open on it. I also noted that it wasn't an iPhone. I let out a gasp and they whipped around the corner and back into the backyard as I bolted inside the front door. I ran to the back slider door and slammed and locked it, then ran upstairs whilst calling the police. That entire interaction outside happened in about 10 seconds, and when the police showed up, they did nothing at all, just like before. After talking with them for a while, I went upstairs to my room and peered out the window as they spoke to my grandparents. And as I was scanning the street from the window, I heard a whistle coming from direct below me in the driveway. It was that whistle people do when trying to get someone's attention, or when calling your dog to you, as if communicating with his buddy to say, "Cops are here, let's dip." My theory about the stakes is that these men were stalking me and casing our house for at least a month before I saw them that first night. They must have seen my dog, and not knowing that she doesn't bark or attack strangers, baited her with stakes to gain her trust so they could go into the backyard without a problem. We moved a couple of months later due to something unrelated, and I never saw them again. To this day I struggle with PTSD that those events caused me, and I have lived in constant fear and paranoia ever since, and I can't be alone at night, at all. I think the reason it affects me so much is because they were never caught. No one knows what their end goal was. And the worst part for me, how the fuck did they find me? Did they follow me home from seeing me somewhere in public one night? Were they some of the gardeners who often mowed the lawn around me as I laid out and sunbathed? Were they some of the workers that redid our roof for weeks on end a month? A month or so before any of this happened, everyone on our street had their roofs redone one by one for about a month, and since I was on the top floor, I often woke up to the workers sitting in my windowsill adjacent to my bed with my curtains open, literally inches away from me. Did one of the workers tell a friend that there was a hot teenage girl who always left her curtains open? Did they find me through social media? I'll never know, and it kills me. I still hear that whistle every now and then. And honestly, it might be auditory hallucinations at this point. I don't know. I'll never know who those men were or what their intentions were. At the time of this story, I was 19 and I'm now 22, and I worked in the local mall. My town is relatively calm, and there were never any major crimes committed. But the city that's about 15 minutes from us used to have the highest murder rate in Canada. The mall where I worked was pretty small, and the usual types of customers were mums with their kids, or elderly people just trying to pass the time. It wasn't a sketchy type of mall at all, and very safe to work at. One day I was on my break, and I went to the food court to get a drink, sit down and just browse my phone as I usually do. I noticed 2 women walking towards me, and my first instinct was that they'd seen my uniform and were going to ask me something about a product in my store, so I thought nothing of it. They came up to me and sat down right away. They both had heavy accents, though I'm not sure where from, because it had been something I'd never heard before. They were dressed very classy, as if they were going to church, and they seemed relatively normal. One of the women pulled out a book, and they began to ask me some odd questions such as, "Do you go to church?" and "Do you believe in God?" It was mainly just things to do with religion, so I assumed they were some kind of missionaries. Then they began to tell me about God the Mother. With me extremely shy, I just listened to them talk. They then asked me if I was able to come with them to a youth group that they had organized that was going on that night. I told them that I was working and just on my break, so I couldn't go anywhere, but they continued to insist. Finally, they got the message that I wasn't going to go with them, so they asked me for my phone number and told me they'd text me next time they'd arranged another one and I could go. At this point, I really didn't want to talk to them anymore, and I just wanted to get them to leave, so I agreed and gave them my number. A couple of days later, I got a text from them trying to arrange something, but I just blocked the number and thought nothing more of it. It's not that I thought they were planning to hurt me. I just wasn't really into going to a youth group. A couple of months later, I was reading the news, and there was a story warning young girls about a human trafficking scheme in my city. It said that women would come up to you and talk to you about God the Mother and try to get you to leave with them. So thank goodness I hadn't finished my shift yet, and thank goodness that I never responded to their text. It's so weird to me to think that if I would have gone, I probably wouldn't even be in Canada right now. So I've never told anyone this story before, but I figured this would be a good place to get it out of my system. This is one of the scariest nights of my life, and it still makes me scared to drive alone at night. The only person in my real life who knows this story is one of my older brothers, who was there after everything went down. So to preface this story, I'm currently a 21-year-old female, and I live in Ohio. At the time this story took place, I was moving from a very well-known suburb outside of a main city to a rural farming town with my family. My parents have never been the city type, as they had both grown up on farms in the south during their childhoods, and our whole family had lived in similar areas until I was about to enter high school, so you can understand how itchy they were to get back to their roots. I am the youngest of 4 siblings. I have 3 older brothers, and I was the last to finish required schooling, so the summer after I graduated from high school, my parents decided this was a good opportunity for a change in scenery because I was no longer tied down to a school district. The town that we were moving to was only around 45 minutes away, and instead of moving everything all at once and overwhelming ourselves with a full house of boxes, we were moving to a house about half the size of the one we had been living in. My parents opted to have us move a chunk of our things every day or every few days for around 2 to 3 weeks, in hopes that it would be easier for us to get settled into the new house. The majority of the drive between the 2 towns is through main highways, and is pretty much a straight shot, so I had become very used to the routine drive after a while. That's why this night was so terrifying, because I had literally made this drive nearly 50 times, and I was so comfortable that my guard was let down completely. I'm a pretty small girl, around 5'3" and about 140 pounds. And even though my dad taught me self-defense when I was younger, I'm the kind of person who freezes during confrontation or under pressure. Annoying, I know. So it's a miracle I made it out of this whole thing safely. This night I had decided to visit some old friends from the neighbourhood that we were moving from, and because I was already down the street from my old house, I decided to stop by on my way back to our new house to pack some things to take back with me. I can't exactly remember what time it was. I'm pretty sure it was around 10 or 11 p.m. But regardless, it was already very dark outside. Now, even though Ohio is a northern state with pretty brutal winters, in recent years the summers have been basically sweltering, even at night. I can also get a little car sick in the heat with all the muggy air getting trapped in the car, and at the time my AC was pretty shitty and never really worked right, so I usually drove with my windows open. And as I said before, it was pretty late, so there were really no other cars on the road. I had maybe seen about 10 cars during the whole drive. When I made it a little over halfway on the second main highway I had to take, there was an intersection with a gas station on my right, and nothing but a river and a bridge on the left. It was a 4-lane, 2-way road, and I had happened to be in the rightmost lane because of a turn I had to make further up the road. This might seem like useless information right now, but it will be important later. I hadn't initially felt off in any way, because again, I had made this drive dozens of times. I pulled up to a red light at this intersection, and I was playing some pop-punk music with my left arm out of my open driver's side window to get some air outside of my hot car. I hadn't noticed at first, but as I was waiting for the light to change, another car had pulled up into the left lane next to me. Looking back now, I don't remember the make of the car. It might have been a Dodge Charger, but I do remember that it was bright orange with a thick black stripe across the top of it. I was singing along to whatever song I had on at the time, when I heard talking next to me. It wasn't so much that I had heard them specifically talking about me, or to me, but they were talking quite loudly, and I have ADHD, so the extra noise above the sound of my music made me turn my head. I regretted it immediately, but when I looked to the source of the noise, I saw a man sticking his head out of the passenger side. I regretted it immediately, because when I looked to the source of the noise, I saw a man sticking his head out of the passenger side window, staring right at me and smiling widely. The look in his eyes made me want to throw up. Apparently he had been talking to me. I turned back quickly, knowing if I kept eye contact any longer he would think I was interested in chatting. Then I heard the sound of a hand hitting hollow metal. The guy in the car next to me was smacking his hand on the outside of his car door, obviously trying to get my attention again. In the middle of all this, the front passenger started to whistle. You know, that signature whistle that a lot of girls get while walking down the street. I started to get angry, but I kept my gaze forward, praying for the light to change so I could get away from these creeps. Now I know it sounds ridiculous that we were still sitting here at this red light, but the town that I had been passing through had really old and shitty light sensors, like the ones you have to back up and pull forward again to set off. And again there had really been no one else on the road to set them off, because there weren't even cars coming perpendicular to us either. I hadn't given them any indication I wanted to talk to them, but apparently this gave them more incentive to continue trying to get me to look back at them. The front passenger and 2 other voices all piped up, saying things like, "Hey baby, why don't you get out and hop in the car? We'll show you a good time tonight. Come on, pull over to the gas station. We're not going to hurt you. Why won't you talk to us? We just want to get to know you, beautiful." At that point I'm shaking and had heard enough, so I rolled up my window and locked the doors of my car. Well, this had apparently pissed the front passenger off, because before the window was up, I heard him shout, "Fucking bitch," before swinging his car door open. Before I knew it, he had gotten out of his car and walked over to the passenger door behind me, trying to pull it open to get inside my car. This is why the specifics of my location were important. I was basically trapped because if I tried to get out, to go run to the gas station, or God forbid I had to run across the bridge on my left side, I would have to pass this car and the man outside mine to get there. Obviously getting out the car and running wouldn't be my best bet here, but at this point I was so terrified I was trying to weigh out all of my options. I know now would have been the best time to get the hell out of there, but I'm literally paralyzed in fear. Again, confrontation freaks me out, and I can't even feel my feet to hit the gas, and my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard that I couldn't feel them either. The man quickly realized he wouldn't be able to get in and walked up to my window, starting to smack a fully open palm on the glass. He was hitting so hard that I actually thought I heard the glass creak, like it was going to crack and break in. When I still wouldn't look over at him, he stopped hitting the glass just long enough to spit all over my window. I have no idea what gave me the strength. Maybe it was the fact that he was literally about to break the glass and get into my car. But right as he lifted his arm, in what looked like him about to elbow my window, I said fuck it and hit the gas running the red light and definitely exceeding the speed limit to get the hell out of there. I don't know what made me look back, but when I glanced up at my rearview mirror, I saw that all 3 guys were now standing outside of the car. In one of their hands I saw a small object, and to be quite honest, I don't even want to begin to think of what it might have been. I almost threw up from anxiety, and pretty much cried the whole way home. My parents own a restaurant and are usually working late, so when I got home my older brother was the only one there. He did his best to calm me down, but I don't think I slept at all that night. It's quite irrational because I know they hadn't followed me further than that light, but I even locked my bedroom door, just to make me feel a little better. I regret not getting a license plate when I looked back, but as you can understand, I was so shaken up, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I've never had an encounter like that again in that area. But granted, I found an alternative route through side streets, so I usually avoid that road altogether. Creepy-ass dudes who tried to kidnap me. I hope we never meet again.